Welcome back to the Innovative Agency, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us again today. It's Sharon Toerek here. I was reminded when I was having a conversation just a couple minutes ago prior to getting started with today's interview, which I'm really looking forward to, that I love brands, apparently. I kind of knew it, but I didn't know that I was expressing it as much as I have on the show. And so, guess what, everybody? We're going to talk about brands today, and I couldn't be more excited about it because Darren Horwitz from TenTen um, is going to spill all the tea about doing branding work for your clients and how to do it well, how to think about doing it, maybe give you some different ideas to consider about how you're doing it. And Darren, I'm so happy to have you with us today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Oh, thank you so much, Sharon. I'm so excited to be here. I appreciate it.
Me too. Me too. I think it's important to start, with maybe a brief conversation about what it really means now for agencies to be branding experts or to even focus on the discipline of branding, because I feel like the definition of that is becoming pretty fragmented or broad. And so I'm sure you have a point of view or a perspective because of the focus of 1010 about what does it really mean? And then what do we need to do as agencies to do it well? What are the questions we need to be asking? What are the things we need to be thinking about? So maybe let's start there. Um, you've been doing branding for a while, and I'm sure your perspective has honed over the years on what it means to a client to have a strong brand.
Yeah, I think so first off, let me say that I specialize in brand implementation. And so it's a subsection of branding as a whole. And so our specialty is really to help organizations figure out what they need when going through a rebrand. What do they need? How long will it take? Who's going to do the work? And of course, the big one is always in how much does a rebrand cost? So we
Right.
specialize in that. And when I think about it, it's there's a lot of umbrella words. Branding, I think, is a big, broad word. Implementation, design, all of these things are big, broad words. So to us, it's really, I think the trick is to maybe define a little bit about what people do, and to your point, my take on what makes an agency good or not good. I think there's a lot of facets to bringing branding to life, and having worked at the brand agencies, the global brand agencies, I maybe get a little snobbish about it, where there's advertising agencies who say they do branding, there's brand agencies who say they do advertising, and I maybe am a little bit more of a purist that says, my belief, anybody who says they can do everything well really might struggle with that, and I struggle with that. So what I have seen and what I have focused on is I've taken my specialty, and really that is my core offering. And we work with organizations and agency partners to help support them in this effort. Now, in doing our work, we uncover the needs for other things, whether it's website need or somebody in the legal and IP space or in tone of voice. And so what we think about is maybe who are experts that do this. Could excuse me, could you go to a full service agency? Sure. And there are plenty of big ones who can probably pull this together. Or what I'm starting to see more of is working with smaller, more specialized groups who can uh, rely on relationships to bring experts to the table and get work done. It's not to say that we do work with the bigger agencies still, again, within our swim lane, and they can offer a lot more, but they're also getting much better at saying, this is not what we do. We have sister companies who can do this. So the bigger holding companies can handle that. But for us, I think what makes an agency good, or what makes us good, is really understanding our expertise and our limitations, and being able to say, no, this is not what we do, and being comfortable with it. I think the hardest thing is probably to say no to somebody, but it's never just no and we're done. It's, here's what we can do for you. Let us make an introduction. And we do that all day long. So
Right. And you mentioned something when we were chatting before we started this conversation about the differentiate, and you said, and you pointed out just a moment ago that your firm focuses on a very specific component of the branding process, which is the implementation. But it occurred to me that even branding work is so focused and specialized that agencies who consider themselves to be branding proficient or branding experts maybe aren't even slicing and dicing as far down as they need to be. Um, Maybe they're doing brand strategy and brand execution, which are two huge but different, wouldn't you say, components of the exercise of looking at brand for a client?
Well, I would think so. Yes.
Yeah,
But I suppose it depends on the size of the agency. But let's just say,
and the client they're
yeah,
working.
and the client, 100% on the client.
Yeah.
But in the space that we work within, we work with larger clients, many global clients. We work with a lot of healthcare systems who are broad reaching, pretty fairly substantial sizes. I would say that there's a huge ecosystem within the world of branding. And even at the bigger brand agencies, when I was there were experts in voice, there were experts in design, there were experts in strategy. And then there was us. And we were um, considered at the point when I was at the agencies, the tail end of
Mhm.
everything. It was, oh, we've designed all this stuff, we thought it through, somebody's got to go make it, go execute it, and here you go. And what we were often left with was we were treated as an afterthought. And I don't think it was intentional. I think it was just everybody kept kicking this branding can down the road,
Yeah.
and just somehow it was magically going to be implemented. But what we started to see as an opportunity, and when I there was really a change in how brands branding was being thought about as far as rebranding, the question was, well, wait, we're about to embark on this as a client. We need to know how much we need to put aside. How much does this cost? Because we have to think ahead. And so there was an opportunity for us to start to put implementation at the front of the conversation as you were thinking about your strategy, as you were thinking about what a logo would look like. Um, we started to have these conversations of, and where does it live? And what do you do with it? And how do you get it out there? And so agencies started getting much smarter, and they were able to think about this in a different way. And we were able to help people, and we still do help people of addressing these questions and really preparing people for not just the basics of, oh, I need a name, I need a logo, I need a strategy and some basic guidelines and we're done. But oh, no, there's a whole long tail that goes with it. And
Mhm.
it was not that the agencies missed this opportunity to work on it, but I think they didn't necessarily bring the conversation forward early enough to really prepare people for what was going to happen. And in doing so, you had a couple of things. One is, I think there was a lot of work left on the table, um, and a missed opportunity. The other was when all of a sudden you started introducing a new work stream and that there was more to do, clients would say, wait a second, I thought we were done with this. There's so much more to do. And there is. So
Oh,
that's where we've really seen this evolution. And really the role that we play now is when working with the agencies who don't offer this as a core practice, they bring us in to help figure out the plan. And it's really thinking through where this brand lives and how do we help our clients anticipate what's going to happen and give them a roadmap so that they know what's going to happen. I mean, it's almost the equivalent of the analogy we give. If you're building a house, you wouldn't necessarily just throw some 2x4s up and hope that everything's going to work. You're going to have an architect, you're going to have a plumber, engineers, you're going to have all these people working together. And the general contractor is really the one who understands all of this and brings it all together. And so when we think about a rebrand, we kind of equate ourselves to the GC. We're not necessarily the architect. We don't design the home, but we know how the home gets built. We're not the plumber, but we know that plumbing is needed and we know who to turn to. And then we know at the end of this, what you want is a beautiful home where your toilet's flush and everything works and your lights go on, right? So,
that's
so
it.
that's us. So we understand this. And that was really where I've spent the last 20 years, is really starting to understand how different disciplines in the industry worked, not because I wanted to do them, but because I knew that we had to string them together and they had to work together. And so I think that's the benefit of what we offer now to agencies, is to help them um, be able to do this in a thoughtful way, not just as an afterthought, not just because they've done it all the time and they know what's needed, but really because we're bringing um, a discipline to the table to help them prepare themselves and their clients for bringing it to life successfully.
Right. So I'm getting two major takeaways from that. And that the first is that the earlier you bring the implementation conversation up with the client particularly, the smoother your process with them is going to go, because they're not surprising them with information they hadn't considered along the pathway. And you're maybe giving, if there are going to be hiccups, you're presenting the potential hiccups much earlier and in a much less expensive fashion, I would hope, than if they're left to, um, you know, the end of the process, which is when implementation is planned to start. But you said another thing, and it occurs to me that agencies would do well to think about this. Um, the implementing is typically where agencies, in my experience from talking with a lot of agency owners over the years, where they have the biggest challenge protecting their margins in the business. It's, it's the making of the stuff, the delivering of the stuff, the scheduling and rollout of the brand elements that have been developed and talked about along the way. Now it's in the hands of the implementation team, whoever that might be, whether it's a group in your own agency or a specialist firm. Hard to protect the margin at that point because commitments have already been made and budgets have already been promised or expected. And as you pointed out earlier, then you're kind of stuck, with whatever cost the client is expecting, or you have to have a really hard conversation. So that's the second takeaway, is that bringing this forward a lot sooner with the right people in the room is going to be protective of the agency's fee structure, margins, etc., associated with the implementation. I wonder if that's been your experience and if you agree with that.
Well, so I think scope creep happens all the time, right? And I
Sure.
think it can happen because either something is not properly prepared for, or things change along the way, or you just didn't know something was coming. So within that, one of the things that we early on, we used to use fee estimators, and I kind of I geek out on Gantt charts. I geek out on fee estimators. I geek out on all these different things that kind of help organizations work. And really, it probably comes from a place of self-preservation. I
Mhm.
was responsible for, to your point, putting stuff out there at the end of a process. And by the time it got to me, everybody had gone through their budgets and their timing, and I was left with days to deliver something that should be taking weeks. I was left with no resources when I should have had 3 people, and I was left with somebody else who decided that that was the value of the work that we were doing in that department.
Mhm.
And so that just didn't work. I mean, it didn't work on so many levels. But one of the things that we did was we started to reverse it and say, here's what we need to do. We know how to do production. Production is pretty straightforward. Implementation is pretty straightforward, in that we look at this like a factory line mentality. These are the steps we need to go through. Yes, there's variables, but we can contain the variables to different scenarios and minimize the risk there. Um, we know how many people we should have working on this. Well, when we started doing that, we started then going to other departments. And we started asking them, well, what does this really take? Because our timelines are dependent upon their work. And so it's okay if we just wager guesses on timing, but within some parameters, you should have a sense of how long it's going to take you to design a logo. You should have a sense of how long it'll take for the client. And we can just make some estimations. In doing that, we can then estimate budgets and we get smarter. So then all of a sudden, what we ended up doing was we started becoming really good at predicting what was needed from a time and money perspective and a resource perspective. So we started to get much more profitable in doing this. And so to that point, yes, we can come in now, and what we're really good at is regardless of the brand, regardless of the ask, we're going in and working with organizations, with clients direct and saying, what do you do? What gets branded? Now let's organize these things to like kind. Let's build you some foundational tools to give you something that's some smart answers where if you need to scale later, you have all the answers, but this is very predictable. And therefore we can put a price point to it. And we know that people are going to be profitable in building it, but you're not going to be overcharged. There's flexibility, all these good things. And I think the agencies are starting to find that this predictability is helping them. It helps them staff, it helps them time it out, it helps them prevent scope creep because we have all the proof to say this is what is truly needed, here is why it's needed, and here's what you can do with it. So that's, I think that's the latter part of what you picked up on. The first part around when we're brought in to help prepare for things, it's interesting. It used to be, I mentioned just a few moments ago that we were brought in around when the logo was being created. So it used to be we were brought in second round of creative because people could then see their logo and get, oh, it lives in different places. I need to put it on an envelope. I need to put it on a sign, whatever it is. And so it was a much easier conversation to have about what's truly needed. But I would say more recently, what we're finding is people want us to come in ahead of the logo work to start the budgeting exercise, to start going to leadership, to understand that we're going to build them a wish list for everything that's needed, regardless of what their logo looks like. They're not going to get their wish list from senior leaders. And then it's a conversation of how do we start to reconfigure and reprioritize the work that needs to happen to give you the most bang for your buck? What do you need to take on internally versus where do you go externally? And let's make sure that you have everything happening. You can then start to proactively manage expectations. And I think the biggest takeaway from what I've seen is by the time you get to a logo or brand reveal, you're prepared for what's next, as opposed to we've just launched, the phones start ringing, we have no idea what to do next. We just know there's more work and we're going crazy. And I think what you may see is in an extreme situation, people are either applauded on the client side for a successful rebrand, or they're looking for another job if it doesn't go well. And that's a very extreme scenario,
Yeah.
size of the company, but it's a very stressful situation going through a rebrand. And the more you can plan for this, I think the easier the job is, the more successful it is. And so again, we're being brought in much earlier. The other thing we're brought in for is, hey, we're thinking about changing a name or just rebranding. What's the difference? And so we'll go through scenarios to understand the cost implications of a name change versus just a brand change. So there's different reasons that we're brought in to help figure it out. But again, because we're talking big dollars here, and we're talking a long tail of work, and we're talking about change and changing internally and externally, the sooner that you can figure out what's needed, the more successful, the more organized, the more smoothly it will run. That's my take on it anyway.
That's a great segue into something I also wanted to ask you about, which is what opportunities do you think that agency leaders and owners might be missing in conversations with their clients or prospective clients, um, when the client has what it perceives to be a branding need or a rebranding need or a refresh or whatever action they are expressing an interest in? You've put out a lot of really good thought leadership on, how branding impacts the success of a client company and how branding impacts the perceived value of a company, how it can create financial outcomes in an M&A situation for a company. So, what do you think a lot of agency owners might be missing in terms of opportunities in conversations with their clients about branding in general and the work that the client approaches them about potentially doing?
Yeah. I think there's two things that stand out to me. The first is, and I say this as much as people will listen. I think when you go through a change of any kind with your brand, we often forget about the people aspect to this, and I call it brand empathy or rebrand empathy. But really, this idea that leaders are close to the change that's happening. They understand it. They've been a part of it for certainly 6 months, maybe a year, maybe 2 years. Those working on it are very aware of what's happening. I think what we often forget, or what we see people often forget, is that there is somebody within your company who now needs to do something different. They need
Mhm.
to explain it to somebody else. Um, they have needs that maybe, nobody's thought about. And so the more that you can go in and not just say, here's what a rebrand looks like. This is the answer. This is what you need. We're done. And I know it wouldn't be like that, but the point
No, I
is,
hear you though, and I'm
yeah,
so glad you're talking about this.
it's so, and I learned this early on, which is really how I built my business. Was I can go in and tell anybody what it's going to take to rebrand. It's pretty easy to point to all the different things. And
Mhm.
they're like, great. And how much does this cost? And then I give them a number. And they're, whoa, 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 wait a second. We're different. Okay.
How?
Are you?
Yeah.
So everybody thinks they're different, and they are to some degree. So what we got really good at is, I'm not going to come in and tell you the answer. I'm going to ask you a whole bunch of questions, and then I'm going to tell you what I see. And then based on that, I'm going to prove to you why my recommendations are relevant to you. So it uncovers a lot of work that needs to happen. It doesn't mean that you have to have an agency do the work, but it means that there's a lot of work being uncovered. There's a lot of science behind science. I use that term loosely, but there's a lot of math behind why we're making recommendations. And we can point to this and say, because of what you've told us you do, and you're giving us this information, here is how we would solve for it. Doesn't matter who does the work. This is how you solve for it. And they tend to say, I get that. Okay. I think the agencies have an opportunity to, when we work with them, it really is uncovering that. We are a third party auditor who comes in and says, this is what's needed. And I think the agencies benefit from that. We've talked about white labeling, not white labeling. We don't white label. And again, the reason is it's because of credibility. And we
Mhm.
find that clients find the information more credible as a third party. What you do with your information is up to you. Whether you go to your agency and do more work or not, that's between you guys. We are there to just tell you what we see. So I think there's an opportunity there. And I think, sorry, I want to make sure I'm addressing your question.
No, you know what I'm really glad that you said, and the word I was thinking of when I just asked you that question was empathy. So I'm so glad that that's how you expressed it, because let's face it, the tenure of a CMO is getting shorter and shorter. The tenure of any senior marketing leader in an organization is under all kinds of challenge and scrutiny.
That
And
is such a
so
tough job.
it
I
is,
don't,
and you're talking about giving them the cover that they need within their
yeah,
organizations. And I think
it,
that's important for agencies to recognize.
it is such a tough job to be at a senior level marketing person. It is constantly under scrutiny of deliver, 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 deliver. So to that point, I think anything that can be done to help a marketer understand, and this is the big takeaway that we try and teach clients. You cannot go through a rebrand from a marketing centric point of view. The trick here is to include representation from the organization to be able to provide you the information of what they do every day. So going back to this idea of empathy, thank you for bringing that back up. I have a day job. Whatever that job is, I could be doing custodial services for the organization. I could be, doing facilities and sites. It doesn't really matter. I have a day job. I interact with this brand in some way, shape, or form. I have tools that I need. You as a marketer are never going to understand what it means to be in my shoes and do my job. I will never understand it from your point of view. You'll never understand it from my point of view. So by going out there and really engaging with different groups and understanding their needs, you don't have to say yes to everything, but you need to understand what their needs are so that you can anticipate them and prepare the brand tools and the conversations and the training and the engagement that's needed to make them feel heard. The sooner you make them feel heard and part of this, the more they're going to want to deliver
Mhm.
successful results on your behalf. So making them a brand champion, making them a brand ambassador. If you think about this, yeah, my company just went through this rebrand and all I got was this lousy t-shirt. Or,
Mhm.
hey, I'm so excited. My company just went through this. let me tell you what we just went through today. Let me tell you what I just learned. I can't believe this is the company I've been working for 10 years. And they didn't just throw out our history,
No, they
but
care
look
what
at
I
all the,
think. Yeah.
and they asked me, and I learned, again, we learned this by working with clients, and a brand, I'll give you one, I'll keep it short, but there was a brand team just launched a brand. They put all the tools out there that they thought was needed. They had digital teams going out and just going wild, wild west on them. And the brand team came to the agency and said, hey, we did guidelines, we did assets, we did everything, but it's not working. We need to fix them. Well, wait a second. Did you ask them what they need? No.
Mhm.
Okay, well, let's start there. Why don't we just bring them to the table and say, guys, this is what we're trying to achieve. To protect this investment, we're trying to do these things properly. We can't have you going out and doing your own thing. And the digital team said, we'd love to do the right thing, but you gave us tools that don't work for us. Here's what we need. And so two things came out of this. One is they were able to provide the right tools that were needed to do the job, but they also now had a group of people part of the solution who were going to then further govern the brand within their own groups because they were part of it. They were asked, what do you need? So they could say, yeah, they gave us everything we want. So I think that part of empathy is really critical, whether it's from preparing people for change, because most people don't like change, or making sure that they have the tools that they need, or even just simply the talking points to go home and tell their family over dinner, like, what a great day I just had. So that's
Yeah.
my belief.
No, I mean, and this is part of the psychologist's job that every agency pro has to execute on. And at some stage of the work that they do, the client is, as much as they want to see the financial metrics achieved and as much as they want to see the physical evidence of what you do for them, they need your help and your coaching as an agency, I think, on the why. And they need your communication coaching on how they can talk about the why to C-suite leaders, to customers, to other departments, whoever it is. That is all such a critical component of being a successful brander, right? I don't think that's a word, but I just made it a
No,
word.
it is. It's a total
Brand,
word. Yeah. You're a brander.
but
You're in branding. You are a brander.
yeah. So I
Yeah, I'll
mean,
give
I
you
think
that.
yeah, we're all we all spend some time as armchair psychologists, and that's just part of the role. And I feel like, based on just hearing you share that case example and just our conversation in general, I feel like that makes a difference in the positive financial results of the agency too, is executing
Yeah.
well.
It's really interesting in that despite there are plenty of agencies who say they do brand metrics, and I'm sure they do. I'm not challenging that, but the correlation between your brand and revenue is difficult. I think it's not my area of expertise, but just looking at this as one part, how do you point that? Same thing with marketing.
Attribution is
How do you,
hard.
it is. And so, but what you can point to is we know this, that it's a choice. Where you go to buy products or services is a choice. Um, I used to have a boss who said people do business with those they want to have a beer with. And I've taken that to heart. Now, are you going to go out there and be Apple and say we're serving beers to all our people? No, but I think what you get from an Apple is you know what to expect from the experience. You know what to expect from the people in the Genius Bar. You know what to expect, and they're there, and they come across as there is a cult personality that says we want to help you. We want to help you succeed. Whether it's Apple or a restaurant chain doesn't really matter. So I think this idea of helping people become brand ambassadors or brand champions in a way that works for them is really critical, because they are an extension of your brand beyond the product.
Mhm,
And it is what, probably the products are great, but the people need to be there as well. And I think you need to rely on every employee to be a brand ambassador.
mhm,
It's though, so the two things, the two things, or well, the biggest thing, two things we ask people are, when you go through a rebrand, do you think logo is synonymous with brand? Is that
mhm,
what your organization thinks? Because if that's the case, we have some work to do.
mhm,
Um, Brand synonymous with logo. The second one is, are people aware of the why story, why you're doing this? And to your point, that is such a critical component to bringing people through this journey. Why are we doing this? Because inevitably you're going to go through a very expensive exercise for all the
Right.
right reasons. And somebody at the end is going to say, I didn't
Right.
get my raise. How come? So I think to just focus on that why story and make sure that you have it solid and tight and you share it is really critical to success.
Wow. This is all really powerful stuff for any of you agencies out there who are working at any step of the food chain and the branding process for your clients. I mean, important questions to ask, important things to suss out from your clients, and important things to think about in terms of how quickly you bring forward what the brand change actually is going to mean, just from an implementation perspective, and what that's going to cost in time and money and attention, and so much good stuff here today, Darren. So I'm so appreciative to you for sharing some of that secret sauce with everybody. And I know that I've learned a lot. I'm sure the agency owners and leaders listening have learned a lot too. The other thing I want them to know is, how do they find out more about what 1010 does and how you collaborate with other agencies, and where are the best places where they can find you?
Yeah, thank you. I will leave you with one thing, and then I will give you all this information to
Mhm.
the point that you were making about bringing it forward. I think it is beneficial for agencies to bring this conversation up earlier so that there is an opportunity to ensure they can continue doing work with their clients beyond their initial scope and properly preparing them for the more work that has to happen. It's an easier conversation. With that,
So important. Yeah.
with that, I can be found on LinkedIn, but also our website, 10tengroup.com, all spelled out TEN group.com. You can get a hold of me there, all the information. Happy to talk to people in any way that's helpful to them. Even just to pick my brain is totally cool. I'm happy with that.
Amazing. Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you.
Darren
Uh,
Horwitz,
I,
1010, thank you for sharing your
thank you,
time
Sharon.
and your expertise. And thank you, everybody else, for joining us today. I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next episode. And until then, everybody stay well. Take care.